Okay, 3, 2, action. Hey gang, Dennis here. I was amazed by the post I did on the being a paperboy and the life lessons from that, and there were so many people that shared their memories from it, and several of which were cross sections of my life. And I was shocked when I saw several folks from Catholic U, who I was classmates with at Catholic U, that posted. And so I thought I'd get us together. We all went to the Harvard on Michigan Avenue, also known as the Catholic University of America. So I wanted to get us together and kind of just share stories about being a paperboy. I did want to ask you guys to just quickly introduce yourselves. Where were you a paperboy? What are you doing now? If you could, Joe.
Joe Cunningham.
Where and where were you a paperboy, Joe?
Okay. I was a paperboy in Northeast Philadelphia for the Evening Bulletin, which was actually in circulation in the biggest paper in the world at one point from 1845 to 1982, right after I got done with them.
You're not the reason it went under. And now you are doing what? You're a successful realtor, because I see all your posts and your signs. So
Yeah, real estate in Northeast Philly as well, and real estate investment in here in South Jersey.
awesome. Mike.
Hey, Dennis. Hey, everyone. Hey, Mike McGarity here. I delivered the Herald News, which was an afternoon paper in Essex County, New Jersey, right outside of New York City and Newark. Retired FBI as a career, currently Vice President for Capital One Security.
And Mike, we're lucky enough to live close by, and our daughters are good friends. So great to see you. Joe Rafter.
Hey guys, great to see you. Great to be here, Dennis. I love this topic. Joe Rafter, I was a paperboy for the Daily Local News, which was an afternoon newspaper. I came home from 7th and 8th grade, and I had about 300 papers to deliver in my neighborhood. It was I had to go out and come back. Like I had to load up my bag, go out, and then kind of reload. I think 3 times. I think I could fit 100 in the bag. Learned a ton. We'll get into that in a little bit. And I live in Malvern, Pennsylvania. I'm a global client partner for Capgemini Consulting.
Awesome. And on the side, you're an advocate for youth tackle football. You run one of the best advocacies there, so that's great to see. So, yeah. Hey, I don't mean to judge guys, but Mike, were you a morning paperboy, or were you an afternoon? Come on now. I was a morning guy. Washington Post, 5 a.m. That was tough. I don't know how I did it. My parents had to wake me up and they'd have to make sure I was actually down there doing it. But that was something. All right, so guys, favorite thing about being a paperboy? Anyone?
The money.
Favorite thing about being
the
a
money.
paperboy? What's that? The money?
Yeah.
The money.
The money.
Yeah.
How much did you guys get paid? So what'd you make? Like, I think I made 3 cents a newspaper or something like that.
No, well, ours was different. You would get the tips, right? So it was very much like a little bit of a Ponzi scheme. Like I would have to go out and do collections, pay to someone up, and then I would get the tips and a little bit more, but mostly it was the tips.
The tips, okay. Joe?
That was the same with me. I'd have to collect from people, and I remember people being like, sorry, you're gonna have to come back next week for the 75 cents. I would be like, are you kidding me?
Yeah.
I have to come back and do it. But with my paper route, I had a little bit of both. I had to do the after school, and then on the weekends was in the morning. So that was early morning on the weekend. So all my free time when my friends were out, I was doing papers.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Well, I was sleeping in the afternoon when you guys were delivering because I got up too early. Least favorite thing about being a paperboy? Least favorite thing?
I'd have to say collections, to what Joe was saying. Yeah. Like, I'd have my pencil, my notebook, and I'd be tracking what Mr. and Mrs. Smith owed me. And man, like, especially, there were plenty of people that would argue over a quarter or a nickel back in the day. And I'm like, look, I'm just a 12-year-old kid trying to make a couple bucks, right? And you got your paper. Can you just pay me your $2.50, please? And they would argue.
Oh man, I like I share this story, and it was more than one customer. I would knock on the door Sundays. I would do my collection Sunday evenings, and I'd knock on the door, and the light would, like a kitchen light would be on. They would look out and see me in the silhouette standing outside, and they'd turn out the lights, and they'd me at the door. Like, and dumb me, I didn't realize that I just need to stop delivering the paper to these guys. I would still deliver the paper to them because I didn't want to, have any conflict or anything. But that was those mother.
You know what, Dennis? So it was definitely collections, but then the weather. But a funny story on the collections, like you're so right. You got to go around and you got to hit up these people for money. And then this is definitely decades later. I'm working an organized crime case in New York City, and I'm looking at a Brazilian subject who's getting cocaine from the Colombians. And who comes in but an Italian guy to shake him off for the money? And so it was very much like a paper route. I then followed the Italian guy who's from New Jersey. I was in Manhattan at the time. And I got into this Italian family in New Jersey that I was working on the organized crime side. And I just followed him to do his collections. And honestly, I remember at the time, it reminded me of being a paper boy. Like, this guy, what do you like? He went from place to place. And what I would do at the bottom of my street, there was a candy store. So when I was collecting my money, I definitely stopped in for a candy bar, a couple video games on the way up. And this guy stopped at the diner after a couple collections. Like, it took all day, but like he had his meals in there and everything else. And I was like, just like being a paper boy, trying to make his collections. But it taught me, from the investigative side, follow the money, right? Like, and to follow that guy and who picks up from him to the next guy. So
I thought I was going to learn some interesting things, but I didn't think being a paperboy would help us fight organized crime.
follow the money.
That's a winner there. So, all right. So, what's your biggest life lesson that you carry with you? I've got two, and so, one is when you're doing hard things, find a way to make it fun. I bought a Sony Walkman, and I would listen to my Walkman I'd listen to Led Zeppelin. I remember listening to Led Zeppelin, the Kinks, Leonard Skinner, all the like 70s bands, 60s and 70s bands. And that made it more fun. And so I always, it was a lesson for me, like when you're doing something hard, find a way to make it fun. And the second thing, and you touched on this with like why you did it, the best thing was the money. Like, to me, I had a goal. The only reason I was doing that paper out, because I wanted to buy a 1980 Gibson Les Paul custom guitar. It cost $608 at Venom and Music in Springfield, Virginia, in 1980. I mean, this thing, like, I had no business. And my parents were like, we're not buying that for you. That's crazy. And they said, if you make your money, you can go buy it. And a year, I don't know, I think I made $100 a month, if that. That feels high, but also on the collections, if I didn't collect, I had to pay. I had to pay for the newspaper. That was terrible. Those are two life lessons for me.
I had a couple that I would add to that. Overcoming adversity. I just had like on here the weather, dogs, people not paying, and just getting up and with tying into that the work ethic. Like, we got up as kids and doing this. Like, my kids weren't doing that when they were in 5th and 6th grade, like out there collecting money from people, knocking on doors, going out trying to solicit new customers, and doing all that stuff. So I think it did prepare me at a young age and interacting with people, both good and bad. There was some really nice people. They would give you candy. I had some Italian folks. The grandma didn't speak English, but she would say, "You want some food?" And I said, "Yeah." And they would come home, and the father would come home. I'd be sitting there eating a bowl of pasta. And like you just learn the good and the bad from people, and then you just responsibility. Like, we didn't want to do this stuff.
Yeah.
You know what? Like, you were up in the morning, like, "Yeah, I love this." I can remember being like, "This sucks."
That's right.
But we would do it, because of the money. We decided that that's what we were going to trade for that cash, And one last thing, Christmas was awesome because you always got paid like bank, and that's where I would usually buy something nice for myself, like a bike or something like that, like you said.
Yeah. Great.
I would
Mike, you got one?
Yeah,
or two?
I would say from the, definitely the goal. Like for me, it was a 10-speed bike I wanted to buy. So having that saving, learning how to save even beyond that. Like, hey, collecting that money, not buying the candy bar, saving more per week to get that. But the other thing is like the life lesson that just resonates even as adults is there's world leaders. President Obama will say, you got to get stuff done. That's a successful person, getting stuff done. Admiral McCraven, first thing you do in the morning, make your bed. You had to deliver that paper. If you couldn't sleep, and it was the afternoon, I couldn't take a nap, or in the morning on the weekends, like Joe had to wake up and do it. If you didn't do it, there were phone calls. Like you had hundreds of people, 20 people, whatever, however you delivered, they were relying on you to deliver that paper, and you were their connection to the world. So you had to get it done, right? And so that was the one thing you had to get done every day. And that was just the start of it. Honestly, you did that, then you went to practice. You couldn't go to baseball practice till you got the paper route done. So you very much get
That's
one
right.
thing done, and and then you just build on that momentum.
Mike, it's
Thanks.
that context is so awesome because nowadays you think a newspaper is an alternative that sometimes gets chosen by the general population these days. But back then, when we were paper boys, based upon our gray hair, a long time ago, the newspaper was everything. Like
Yeah.
you watched the local or national news, or you read the newspaper to get your news. Maybe the radio, but you couldn't get it anywhere else. So people were so reliant on that newspaper coming home at the end of every day that they could read and find out what was going on in the world. I think that's probably taken a bit for granted these days. But the two pieces I would share, first was it taught me how to be an entrepreneur, right? Because you had to sell, you had to collect, you had to be the operator to deliver it. Like you were involved in it was like your own little business. The only thing you didn't have to worry about was the supply chain of news stories and physical in the papers themselves. They get dropped off at the bottom of my parents' driveway, and you'd undo the bundle, and you kind of ran the whole thing end to end. So I think it helped instill a little bit of an entrepreneurial spirit in myself. And the other thing was, and maybe this is similar to what Joe said, but it's hard work. Like it's a I mean, I was a 12-year-old kid, right? So hard at 12 years old is a lot different than hard at our age. But I had to carry, I don't know, 50 pounds of papers, and I had to go out and come back and reload, and go out and come back and reload through the snow and all that kind of stuff. And so I remember in the summers, because I was in the Philly area, it was so hot. And of course, with being a newspaper, I'd have ink all over my hands.
I was just gonna
Yeah,
say, you guys remember
I mean,
ink, the smell of the
ink, the
ink and the
smell.
paper?
I'd come back home and I'd put in the kitchen sink. I'd put the faucet on cold water, and I'd have these black hands, and I'd soap them up and stick them under there, and I would just put my hands under the water to cool off because it felt so good. And I think that's kind of like speaks to the hard work. And it's a shame I think it's a shame that kids these days, they don't have opportunities like that anymore, right? That what we learned in our generation, those opportunities are really, really hard to find for our kids, and I wish there were other
Well,
opportunities for them.
somebody had posted that point, like, hey, what is it that kids? I do think, and our society is so sports focused, and my kids were very big into sports. I do think the commitment to sports now is so very different than when we were kids. That I almost felt like was their job. Like, so if you played club
Yeah.
sports, you were doing that almost every day, and you had to work. You had to work out. You had to do stuff and prep for practice. You had to practice. You had to do the games. So that there were some good life lessons there. At least I hope so, because otherwise, we'll see, right?
So, Dennis, can I add something to
Yeah.
that? Getting up early and getting dirty and working, that all prepared us for those 6 a.m. practices at Catholic U, man.
Exactly.
Yeah. So we were one of the only schools. We were written up in Sports Illustrated for doing morning practices. And it was because we were a Division III program. We had no control over our class schedules. We had no right of first registration or anything. So our coach was like, you guys, and some kids would try to set up their classes so they didn't have to go to practice or skip out early. And so we would do 6 a.m. practice. And I do remember like getting up feeling that way, like the smell of dawn, right? Like of like the early morning and the grass in the fall. Like I remember, and getting your feet all wet walking through, sometimes you'd walk through the grass of people's yards, you get all wet from the dew. I remember all that stuff, but you're right. I never missed a practice. I was never late. And I'm sure it had something to do with being a paper boy. So. Mm-hmm. All right, guys. Hey, listen, I love seeing you guys, love catching up. We are officially old when we're talking about stuff back 40 years ago. And everybody's going, newspapers? You guys actually physically had papers, right? So, but great seeing you, and thanks for the feedback. Fun stuff.